Okay, shall we start, Bex?
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to our very first PSHRE Teachers Network. The reason this network has been set up is because they're often, as PSHE lead in your school, you are the only one. Some of you might be lucky enough to have other teachers that specifically teach PSHE, but a lot of the time, as a lead in this subject, you are kind of by yourself. So the focus of this network, which I feel like we need to grow into over the next few sessions and really work out how we're going to structure the sessions and what will benefit the most people, is to make it almost feel a bit like a curriculum meeting where we've got somebody that we can bounce ideas off of and where we can discuss problems and look at resources and things like that in the same way that you would do in, say, a science curriculum meeting or a maths one. So today we're going to be looking at, is your setting meeting the statutory RSE and HE obligations, and really looking very basically, are we doing the very minimum that is expected of us, and then we're going to build from there in futures, looking at things like what should a PSHE lesson look like, what are the non-negotiables in a PSHE lesson, how do we assess it, how do we deliver it to SEND students, how do we deliver it to low ability students, how, you know, lots of things that we can build on in the future. With that in mind, I'm aware that we've got quite a few questions that have been asked previous to this this meeting, and a lot of them most of them fell into two categories. One's about SENDs and one's questions about assessment, and I don't think today is the right platform to necessarily answer some of those questions, because actually the people we have here today are not the absolute best people to answer a question specifically about SEND, for example, and there will be future meetings where we will have somebody who that is their specialism. They work in a SEND school, or they deliver PSHE to SEND students within a mainstream setting, and likewise assessment. So where the questions are applicable, we will answer those as we go along, but rest assured we will answer those questions, and we are building up a bank of questions that have been asked to us. They will be answered over the next few sessions. The way the day will run today is that we have three people speaking, myself and Louisa and Helen. And we're going to be talking about three different topics each. Okay, so Helen's a little bit shy, so she doesn't have a photograph, but I think you can see her on the screen there. My name is Rebecca Hendry. I am the Bridgewater and Taunton College Trust Curriculum Lead for Relationship and Sex Education and Health Education, and I'm also a science teacher at Manchester. So I do my curriculum lead job 1 day a week, and I'm a science teacher 4 days a week. Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, sure. So I'm Helen Stone. I'm an assistant head of primary in our school at Bridgewater College Academy. I also lead on PSHRE and parental engagement as well. So most of my experience really is kind of early years and year one. So at the moment, I currently teach parts in year one, and also part of the time I'm out for assistant head role as well.
And Louisa?
Hi, I'm the subject leader for science and PSHE in Maidenhead Academy, which is a middle school, so quite an unusual school setting. We have years 5, 6, 7 and 8. Part of my PSHE role, I'm also in charge of careers.
Thank you. So we've got quite a sort of a diverse trio, all with very different experiences to talk to you today. So the structure of this meeting is, firstly, I'm going to go through some messages from Ofsted and what has come through from them with regards to PSHE recently. Then Helen's going to talk to you about policy and SLT responsibility. Then I'll be back to talk to you about timetabling. And then Louisa's going to talk through with you how she has developed her curriculum in her school and has written it largely written it herself, and then we'll have any of the questions. But actually what we're going to do after each section, if you have a question that is relevant to that section, please will you type it in the chat. We've given over a good chunk of time for questions, so please don't be shy, please type those questions into the chat. And Chloe, who I should introduce, from Teach First, who's sort of done all of the administration and is going to be monitoring the chat and taking on your questions as well. So you can pop them into the chat as we go along. And that would be brilliant. Okay, what I mean about messages from Ofsted is this largely, when I reference a message from Ofsted, is largely from information that was delivered by Rory Pownall, who's the HMI responsible for PSHE, when he gave a recent training session that I attended. And so those specific messages will be threaded through this presentation. PSHE is not in the inspection handbook as an individual entity, but elements of PSHE are threaded all the way through the guidance, and it has become very important. And one thing that Ofsted are looking at when they come into your school, and even if they don't do a deep dive specifically into PSHE, they are looking for three main key areas. The first one is intent. You know, what's the intention? Is there a policy? Are SLT completely on board? Is this something that runs through the entire school ethos? Is the curriculum meaningful? And is it delivered with sufficient time to embed it? And then the third area, which Rory said at the moment is not something that they're aware of, but they're not truly focused on it. Another couple of years and it will become a key part of it, is looking at the impact on how you are assessing it, looking at the effect of the PSHE curriculum on things like behaviour logs, safeguarding disclosures, that kind of thing, and the general demeanour of the students and the teachers as they move around the school and interact with each other. And yeah, his training was quite reassuring to me that actually it's more about a general understanding of what's happening in schools rather than something that's going to be really, really heavily scrutinised, particularly assessment at the moment, because this is quite a new thing. PSHE, RSEHE, PSHRE, what do we call it? Unfortunately, because when they decided that these elements are going to become statutory, they didn't include all of the PSHE curriculum, or what would have been traditionally taught. So about 80% of it is RSE, so your relationship and sex education and your health education. That makes up about 80% of what was the traditional PSHE curriculum. And so we've got about 80% of our curriculum which is statutory. And therefore you need to have policy written for it, and you need to have SLT responsibility and your curriculum intent and things like that structured. The other 20% is made up with things like careers, which obviously with the Gatsby benchmarks and things like that have their own objectives and their own statutory objectives that we need to meet. But there are other elements, for example, economic well-being at Key Stage 1 and 2 and financial choices at Key Stage 3 and 4, that are not statutory. However, without teaching that kind of element, there are things that are in the statutory curriculum, such as looking at things like gambling, for example, and making sensible choices there, that actually are almost impossible to teach if you haven't taught a child what a good financial choice looks like. So and things like safety in the home as well. So actually what we talk about here, although there's 80% of it is statutory, what we're referencing in this network is the whole curriculum, including all of the things that wouldn't necessarily be statutory. So I'm going to hand over to Helen now to talk about policy and SLT responsibility.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would just like to say I'm certainly no kind of expert when it comes to writing a policy for your PSHE, RSE, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience of having done so, you know, as part of working within a trust. So one of the key things that Bex has just said, the most important things that we're looking at with our PSHE delivery is the intent, the curriculum, and what impact is that going to have. And I feel that your policy, although it might not be one of the most exciting things to have to do as part of your job role as a PSHE lead, it actually really is very crucial, and it needs to underpin all of those key areas. So it really does need to underpin your intent, what you intend for the students for their future, the curriculum, and where you're placing different subjects and the impact that you want it to have. So it is really, really vital that your policy is reflective of all of those really key areas. So as you know, that there have been statutory changes within relationships education and relationships and sex education, and so you must have a policy for this. You may wish to combine it with your personal development or PSHE policy. However, there will be certain elements that you will need to have that are very clearly a separate policy. And again, one of the things that I think are really important is that you must consult with the parents, and that will be tricky. It does depend on where your school is situated. For my context here in Bridgewater, we don't find that perhaps all of our parents are always very engaging in their children's education. So you are going to have to be quite creative about how you involve the parents in your policy. So for example, one of the things that I did when I launched our policy was I did a Loom video, so that parents perhaps that maybe their literacy skills were perhaps not great, a Loom video was another way that they could engage with that. So it's really important that you do make sure that the parents have had access to what you have written in your policy. And of course, it needs to reflect on the community in which you serve. That maybe depends, whether you're in a small village area or whether you're in a city or whether you're in a faith school. It really does need to be reflective of where you are and where your context is. Excuse me, thank you. And again, as the senior leader for your area, you need to make sure that you know full well exactly where your intentions of the policy are, so where they are going. So if you could click on for me, Lex. Thank you very much. So as we've said, there are some kind of areas within PSHE and within relationships and within sex education, within personal development, within PSHE, there are some areas, and of course and within science education as well, where there will be some crossover. So I would make sure within your policy that you do define exactly what you are including within your policy and within the curriculum as well, and make sure that the subject content is set out within your policy so that they can see the progression of the subjects. And of course, again, within your policy, talk about how it's going to be taught and who is responsible for delivering it. It might be yourself as the class teacher, it might be somebody else within the school, but again, it is really important to outline that as part of your policy. And again, another area that I would include within the policy is how it's going to be monitored and how it's going to be evaluated. I would also look at it yearly. It's not just something that you've written and gone, tick, that's that done. We don't need to kind of look at that policy because I've done my policy. It will need to be looked at yearly, and again, just to tweak it, make sure it is up to date, make sure it is within your context. Situations change, so you may want to make sure that is done yearly, and maybe pop it in your diary as well, because I would forget things like that. So I would make a note of that for next year as to when you do need to make sure that you have updated that policy. because of the nature of some of what we teach within relationships and sex education, it is so vitally important that parents know what their child is going to learn and whether which aspects of that they have the right to withdraw their child from. So all of these kind of pieces of information should be really clear within the policy. From my experience, I would always say communicate really carefully and effectively with your parents, particularly with the youngest children. So for example, one of the areas that we teach within the curriculum that we use, which is Jigsaw, is students learning the correct anatomical names for different body parts. So we notified parents to let them know so that they knew what the children were going to be learning. And of course, rumours happened and they thought we were going to be showing photographs, of different aspects of that. So it's really important within your policy that you include what it is that the students will be learning, so that you're very open, very honest with the parents, so that they completely fully understand, what their child is going to be learning, and also whereabouts within that lesson that they can withdraw their child or not withdraw their child, because of course there are now a lot of this which is statutory requirements. Okay, thanks Bex. So like I said, I think it is really vital that your policy is bespoke to your setting. It has to be reflective of where you are, where your situation is and your context. So it would be quite easy to perhaps, borrow another policy from another school and maybe just, change the name. But I would really recommend that you really personalise it to where you are and what is right for your school, your situation, your context, the community in which you serve, and also perhaps, if you're a faith school as well, you may want to include different aspects of, what the students will be learning, because again, you might find that, parents will have questions about, what it is that their students will be learning. So yeah, again, make sure that it is reflective of where you are and where your context is. And again, of course, so much of this subject isn't a kind of a nice, clear, neat little boxes. So much of this will link with, safeguarding. It will link with science. It will link with PSHE, personal development. So again, within your policy, I would say that I would recommend that you link that so that you are showing a kind of a joined up picture with your PSHE policy. And again, like I've said about a long-term plan, you will be able, when you do that, you will be able to see, particularly with the spiral curriculum, where that progression of skills is going to go and where the students are going to go with that information. So for example, again, in year one, if you're talking about kind of some drugs information, drug knowledge with the children at the age that I teach, we would talk about being very careful with medicines, if you find medicines and what to do with them and so on. And then throughout your documents, you would show how those skills and how that knowledge will develop, and that will be in your long-term plan as part of the policy, as part of that overview for schemes of learning and so on. And of course, how you're going to include the expectations of the governors to be part of that, how your head and your senior leadership team, and where they are going to fit within your policy as well. And also, this needs to be really, really clear on your website. Again, I've talked a lot about the parents, but it is really, really key that we get this right, so that parents, and of course anybody else who will be visiting your website, it's all there so that they will be able to identify where the students are and where they are in terms of their learning, the curriculum and the intent and the impact of what you aim for your students as well. Thank you. Oh, you're clicking.
I'm just gonna drop in just very quickly. For those of you, Chloe has shared the link to the Google Drive, and there is on there some examples and templates for different policies from different schools, and I will update that with a couple more. Got a couple more to add in there as well.
Thank you. And I would also actually say that if your school is part of an academy trust, you might be a multi-academy trust, that you will need to make sure that you have an addendum, a section of the policy that is specific to your context, so that you have got something that is just, you know, for your school, not just for the trust in which you work. So the next bit is a little bit about SLT responsibility. So for myself, I'm one of the assistant heads in our school, and our school is a 3 to 16 school. So I'm part of the academy leadership team as well. So just to tell you a little bit about my kind of the situation and my experience of that, when you are leading PSHE, like Bex has already kind of said, yeah, it can be a little bit of a lonely experience. And you kind of need to fight the corner for PSHE, is my experience. So when you are in those leadership team meetings, if you are part of the leadership team meeting, you always kind of need to sort of fight the corner a little bit for PSHE. So it might be that when any sort of decisions are being made about staffing, or maybe timetabling, or the curriculum, or staff meeting times, just having that little, oh, hang on a minute, what about PSHE? Or what about how are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure that this is, you know, this is going to be great for our subject? Because I think you'll probably find, you know, everyone sort of tries to fight the corner of their own subject. But it's so vitally important that we get this right, and that this, for PSHE, that it's a real kind of top-down effect, so that the people at the senior leadership team are really truly believing in the importance of this subject, and why actually, you know, we need to make sure that it is of high quality, because of course at the end of the day we need to make sure that our students are able to make, you know, informed decisions which will go on to, you know, help them within, you know, later life. So you're always going to be fighting the corner for PSHE. If you are not part of the senior leadership team within your school, I would recommend that you find somebody that is part of the leadership team that will take kind of responsibility in those meetings, and that they will, you know, again do that sort of same, you know, fighting kind of corner really. And they will also need to make sure that they are very knowledgeable on the intent of the curriculum, and that you work closely with them, so that you are both kind of singing from the same hymn sheet effectively. Because again, you know, at the end of the day, they will need to be accountable for ensuring that the students are taught the, you know, the correct information, the correct curriculum at the end of each key stage. So that's kind of a little bit about my experience, about where I have been in terms of kind of policy writing, and being part of a leadership team, while as in a really big school and an academy, really whilst having sort of early years experience more so than kind of any sort of secondary experience, or even upper key stage 2 experience. So if anybody does have any questions, I will do my very best to answer them, or maybe or Bex or Louise will be able to kind of help me out, particularly if they're sort of secondary related. That's not really much of my knowledge. So yeah, please do share if there's anything you want to know, and I'll see what I can try and help you out with.
Thanks, Helen. We have a question. The hardest thing I have found is determining where students can be withdrawn. Have you got any advice on this beyond consulting with parents, governors and SLT?
Yeah, I mean, Bex, you probably will help me out a little bit with the answer to this one. I think one of the first things is finding out why the parents probably want to withdraw, and that probably might take a little bit of time. And I appreciate that within a primary, you have a more natural conversation with parents, because you quite often see them on the door, you see them on the gate, and so you've already got a bit of a relationship with them. Whereas I appreciate that in secondary it's a little bit it's harder, because you don't really see the parents quite so much. So I think probably first of all I would say maybe try to unpick, you know, what it is that they are concerned about and why they want to withdraw them, and of course have to sort of respect that. But yeah, I think that would be my starting point, and then perhaps maybe give them a little bit more information about, what the content of the lesson would be, maybe share some of the PowerPoint slides with them, so that they are informed first of all, before making that kind of, final decision. Bex, do you want us to kind of jump in a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. That often that the request to withdraw them from the lessons is more about their lack of understanding of actually what is on the curriculum and what is going to be taught to them. And obviously the rumour mill starts going as soon as it's released the information about PSHE. We're going to be talking about puberty, we're going to talk about healthy sexual relationships and things like that. I think that's one of the reasons why your policy and your curriculum intent needs to be really clear and really visible to parents. I would also advise that sharing information on when there is particularly difficult topics coming up. So as Helen said, they gave parents information for the younger year students when they were talking about assigning the proper anatomical names to body parts, or for example in year 10, if you're going to be talking about healthy relationships and you're going to be looking at things like coercion, maybe that's something that you want to let the parents know that topic might be coming up. With the right to withdraw at primary, it's only statutory to teach relationships. If you choose to teach sex education as well, you have to inform the parents that you're going to be teaching sex education, and you have to give them the right to allow the parent to withdraw their student from those sex education lessons, anything that's over and above what's in the national curriculum for science. And they can withdraw their student from that lesson with immediate effect. At secondary, there is still a right to withdraw. What has to happen is there needs to be a conversation between the parent and the DFE guidance is that there's a conversation there between the parent and the head teacher of that school as to why that parent wants that student to be withdrawn. That can be the case up until 3 terms before that child turns 16. At that point, within 3 terms before that child turns 16, should they choose that they individually want to have the sex education and want to be put back into lessons, that can happen. Now, whether that just means that they just go back into normal PSHE lessons, or whether you then decide to catch them up with a bespoke curriculum, that obviously is the decision of your individual setting. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Quick question for this one. In your school for primary, is your PSHE lead a DSL?
For me, no, I am not the DSL, but I am part of the safeguarding team. So like I said, because our school is so huge, we've got 1,500 students within our school. So we have quite a large safeguarding team. So we have our DSL is a teacher of secondary, and then we have 2 deputy safeguarding leads who are non-teaching, but yeah, so I'm part of the safeguarding team, and I case hold a few families, but like I said, so part of the week I'm teaching, and then the other part of the week when I'm on my assistant head days, that's when I would pick up more of those kind of safeguarding job roles. Hope that helps.
Another one. We consulted with parents in September 2020 regarding the changes to RSE. Do we have to address these changes every year?
I would say so, yeah, that would be my experience, because things change, your curriculum changes, let's face it, the world changes, different aspects, different things that we want students to be aware of. Changes. If you think back to kind of this time last year was just at the height of the sort of the Sarah Everard case and situation, and I think we've seen big impact on what we teach and what we know about that because of that. So yeah, I would certainly say so. Bex, you would agree?
I would, yeah. I mean, I think it doesn't have to be onerous, the consultation. You can send, I mean, we did it in terms of, because when we did the consultation for this, it was at the height of the pandemic, so everyone was in lockdown. There was no possibility of having a public meeting, so I sent out a video which explained the curriculum, explained the changes, and and then there was also a questionnaire, quite a detailed questionnaire, because it was right at the start. This has become legislation, you know, it's now statutory. This is the information that I need you to have, and please can you feedback on this? And I think that was the next best thing to having a public consultation where parents could ask questions directly. But yes, we can now send that questionnaire, probably trim it down a little bit, and resend it out. It doesn't have to be onerous to then, you know, reinvent the wheel each year. You're just looking to sort of gather thoughts on any particular, you know, if you're having a particular change. So for example, you might buy in a curriculum and then actually decide that this doesn't meet your needs anymore and you're going to change, or you're going to write your own or something like that. Where if you've made a substantial change like that, I would say yes, you need to definitely consult parents. Yeah, looking at it in that light.
Okay, we have a follow-up question regarding that. So we consulted with parents in September 2020, also received feedback and held conversations with parents that had worries. We are now going to hold parental workshops with phase years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 to share contact resources in more detail with parents. Would you recommend repeating this year on year or on a 2-year cycle?
I think that sounds like a great idea. Yeah, I really like that idea. So yeah, brilliant. Well done to that school. I guess from my perspective, I appreciate that once the child starts in school, you know, they're with you for kind of 7 years plus, you know, depending on your school situation, your school context. You can always offer it. I always think it's better to be more open and more honest with parents than less open and less honest with parents. And at the end of the day, what's the worst that's going to happen? You know, maybe just a handful of people come, but you have at least given them that opportunity, because you will have an influx, you know, particularly maybe in reception, or depends on, again, on your context as to how transient it is. But I personally would give them, you know, as many opportunities to know about what their child is going to learn about in something that is so vitally important.
And another one.
Is there anything else I can help?
Yes, there is. We are using Jigsaw and have been rolling it out each year. So all Key Stage 2 children have done Year 3 last year. This year, Year 4 upward do Year 4. Are we able to continue to roll out in this way? We do additional lessons for Year 5 and 6 in the meantime. Parents are informed of our changes each year.
Oh, okay. So you haven't gone like straight through it. You haven't gone everybody just go straight on with it. No, is that am I understanding that right? Yes.
I think that's how I read it, that they've rolled it out slowly year on year on year.
Okay. Yeah, so my school used Jigsaw, and we've had some, you know, Jigsaw training. I think, yeah, I guess I would probably be inclined to everybody to sort of go for it, really, so that you know, everybody is being taught in the same way, because it is quite structured, and it is you know, kind of a little bit different to how your own perhaps bespoke curriculum might be. But again, that said, I think it's good that you are flexible with Jigsaw as well, and if there's a particular issue that arises, then I would certainly go, oh, okay, we're not covering that until, you know, the second term of June, second week of June. If there's something, a situation that arises, I would say, yeah, definitely, you know, do that lesson as and when your students would need you know, to have that input.
Next question. I am in an infant school and we will not be teaching sex education. Do parents have the right to withdraw on the relationship education in Key Stage 1? And do we need to consult with parents on this?
There is no right to withdraw from relationship education. It's only sex education that they have the right to withdraw their child from. I'm not sure what we mean by the consult with the parents on this, but if you're obviously, you need to consult with parents on writing your relationship policy for your school, but you don't need to consult with parents as to whether they want to withdraw their child or not. If you're not teaching sex education, then there's nothing for them to be withdrawn from, because it's statutory for them to do the relationship education.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of the questions. Oh no, just as soon as I say it.
Okay. Could we come back to that last question after we've done?
Yes,
we've got
even I can answer this one. We've just been asked about the logos at the bottom. So that's our Twitter handle. So you can follow us on Twitter as a network, where you will see any events that we do in the future. And that's our YouTube channel. So this event is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. So please do share with everyone you know.
Okay, so let's move on to timetabling. Okay, so there is no hard and fast rule about timetabling. I did press Rory Pownell in terms of, what is Ofsted expecting. I really wanted him to say, we want to see 1 hour a week, every year group, but he didn't. He said, he was quite sort of wishy-washy about it in terms of, it needs to be bespoke to your setting. So the DfE guidance states that teaching will include sufficient well-chosen opportunities and contexts for pupils to embed the knowledge so they can use it confidently in real-life situations. That doesn't tell us how we timetable it. The Ofsted, it means the coverage must be meaningful, and we need to give sufficient time to teach, embed and check understanding to make sure knowledge is retained, can be built upon and skills developed from it. So Ofsted and DfE guidance are basically saying the same thing. And what I've learned very quickly over the last 4 months of having conversations with the 7 different heads that I work with in terms of what can we put in place? Can we have a standard for our trust in terms of how much PSHE education our children get each week? The answer is no, not a standard across 7 very different, very diverse schools. Even though the academic research says that a good PSHE curriculum is likely to have core curriculum time, that doesn't mean to say that if you haven't got core curriculum time, you're not going to have a good PSHE curriculum. A book written by McWhirter, Boddington and Barksfield said that when PSHE is in regular timetabled lessons, it gives it status and profile, makes it more valued by teachers and the staff, and it becomes easier to deliver things to a standard, the same standard that you would any academic subject. And when you've got a timetabled curriculum, when you know you've got that hour a week or that 45 minutes a week, it becomes much easier to plan and to structure and to build continuity. That's possibly the ideal for most schools, is to have that. But as I say, what I've learned is that actually you just need to be able to work within what you've got and what you've got available and make the best use of time with that. You need to make sure that you're meeting a statutory obligation. So you need to make sure that you can, by the time that child leaves at the end of Key Stage 2 for primary, the end of Key Stage 4 for secondary, or whatever your school happens to be, that they have met those obligations, those things that are set out on the DfE guidance for each topic. Have they met them by the end of that Key Stage? Okay, and if they have, but you've done it through tutor time and drop down days, then you're meeting your statutory objective. Can you evidence learning in progress? Now, whilst Ofsted have said that that isn't a key indicator at the moment, it will become that. So we should be planning for that as we go along, how we're going to introduce evidence that learning in progress. So for example, evidencing learning, every student in our trust has a book or a folder which has in it the learning that they have been undertaking. And obviously depends on the key stage and the context of that school as to what that looks like. But it's really important to work with with what have you got, what have you been given, what, you know, I would always say go in for this is the absolute best thing that I want, please can I have this. As PSH lead, I would like every single student to have a timetabled 1 hour lesson a week, and that might get negotiated down that you get, you know, an assembly slot every term, and you can have tutor time every week or whatever it is, but angle for the absolute maximum that you want, and then you can be negotiated down. It's very hard for you to negotiate upwards from the bottom. So go in at the top and say, this is what we want, this is what we feel that we need, this is what we feel that we need to meet our statutory obligation. Now in the Google Drive, there's also a document that I prepared for our trust that set out, and I've depersonalized it, so all references to the trust and individual things are gone, but it contains with it a lot of academic research about when should PSHE be timetabled, and it also contains references to our staff surveys and our student surveys and things like that, about what do our staff think is the best thing and what do our students want to see, when would they prefer to have their PSHE lesson, who would they prefer to teach it, because if they're preferring having their tutors, then actually that has a massive timetabling implication. If their students would prefer their tutors, then it probably is better for them to have their PSHE delivered in tutor time, for the sake of timetabling. So all of these things come into play when you're looking at when do you timetable these lessons. So there is a document on the shared drive which has lots of research and a framework that we set out as a team, myself and the 7 PSHE leads that I work with. What would we want our framework to look like? I'm not suggesting that you take that and then put your own school name in it and send it off. It's there very much as a guidance document. Obviously, you know, if you're going to reference any research, you need to read that research yourself and understand what that research is showing. But very definitely use that as a guiding document. If you feel like, actually, I feel like we could timetable this better at my school, maybe look at that and have a look at and see what we were going for, in terms of getting the best possible for your PSHE at your school. I'm going to look at 4 methods of delivery and the benefits and the disadvantages of both of them. So obviously looking at tutor time, in theory, especially in secondary, the tutor is the only teacher that student sees every day. There may well be the odd 1 or 2 teachers that they might see every day as well, but tutor time obviously is that relationship building time, that time where any worries hanging over from the day before, etc., those things are talked about. And so those relationships, that pastoral care is developed there, and that tutor may well be the absolute best person to deliver something, you know, as sensitive as coercion and healthy relationships and things like that. Equally, if you put it in tutor time, then all students are learning at the same time. So if all of year 10 are talking about healthy relationships on the same morning of the week, then that's a point of conversation for them to have with other friends from other tutor groups. And it stops things like Chinese whispers, you know, that, you know, 1 year 7 class has started their talk about puberty, but because it's timetabled for other year 7 classes at different times of the day, that they haven't quite got there. So it stops that element of Chinese whispers. Downside of tutor time is often there's not enough time. Sometimes tutor time can be given over to lots of other things, and PSHE can get dropped off the bottom there. And also when it's within tutor time, it doesn't necessarily carry the same kudos or the same importance as it would if it was timetabled in the day. Drop-down days can be brilliant. You can achieve an awesome amount in a short space of time. You can bring in external visitors, and it means that, you know, the organisation of having an external visitor is much easier to do if every child's going to see that person on the same day. It's great to focus on one larger topic. So for example, on mental health week or mental health, when you're talking about mental health week, that you had a drop down day where you had a sort of a wider focus on mental health and how, what you can do to improve it, etc., and how to manage it within that entire day and have that large focus. It's brilliant to supplement existing lessons, so your existing curriculum. It's not ideal to use drop-down days to teach your entire curriculum, because there's really long gaps between the learning. So if you even if you had a drop-down day every half term and you did 6 hours of PSHE learning in one day, by the time you come to the next one, there's been really long gaps between the learning. So there's a problem with retention there. It's really difficult if everything's condensed into one day to sort of embed the principles of PSHE into other lessons. And it doesn't become a daily conversation. It doesn't become this conversation you're having regularly about attitudes and behaviours and principles. It becomes something that we just do on a drop-down day. And equally, if that student happens to be off on that day, they've missed 6 hours of learning and there's no way for them to catch up, or they've missed a huge chunk of that curriculum if that drop-down day is the only form of teaching PSHE. So you need to find a way for that student to catch up. Timetabled, advantages, we're going to give PSHE the importance, a similar importance to any other academic lesson. We can deliver it to the same standard as any other lesson. It's easier to organise and monitor it, and you generally have a defined period of time. Your lessons don't tend to get taken for other things, or you just need to have that 10-minute conversation about this that's going to eat into your lesson time. That doesn't tend to happen. Disadvantages of timetable is that your group may end up having a teacher who doesn't know them so well, and then it's really difficult to build those relationships quickly enough to have those sensitive conversations with them. And equally, other subjects will need, if you're going to go from not having it timetabled to having it timetabled, other subjects might need to relinquish a slot in that timetable. So that means that another subject might feel that they're missing out because PSHE has been put into the timetable. And then the other way that can be done, and I have seen it done, and the jury's out, I've not seen it done spectacularly well, is to embed learning into the other subjects. So to split your curriculum up and drop it into other subjects. The advantage of that is it means that there's a reference to PSHE in every single lesson. So you've got this little drip feed of characteristics and morals and discussion points about what would you do in this situation. It can help make your academic subject really relevant to that student. So you're in history and you're talking about Brexit and things like that. It's making that relevance to that student, and can help really develop a school-wide ethos towards the principles of PSHE. However, it's really, really difficult to monitor and measure any progress in PSHE. It requires every single teacher in the school to be absolutely 100% on board with the PSHE curriculum and understanding how their specific topics feed into their lessons. And one of the things that worries me most is all of a sudden is that student may suddenly come up with a very challenging topic unexpectedly. They go into an English lesson and all of a sudden now they're talking about sexual assault, for example, where they weren't necessarily expecting to do that, and that can cause some consternation amongst students. So I hope that's kind of giving you a brief overview. There is no one size fits all for primary or secondary. It is very much about making the decision that's best for your setting and weighing up the pros and cons and looking at actually what physically have you got available to you and maximizing that as much as possible. So for example, at the school I teach science in, we have it in tutor time, but I'm about to explore with our with our English lead who coordinates drop and read, is really actually embedding some of our PSHE principles into the books and looking at the books that we use in drop and read and how we can extract out the PSHE principles, so that actually, even though it's not a PSHE lesson, when we're exploring the book that we're reading in drop and read, which we do 3 mornings a week, that actually we can really have some good conversations around such things as refugees, or depending on the books that we're looking at, drug use or bullying, or how we, kindness and compassion and things like that, and really exploring the ideas of those books with a PSHE focus, not just a literacy focus as well. So we're looking at other ways that we can embed PSHE within our curriculum as well, not just within a timetable lesson.
So we have quite a few questions.
Okay.
First one, is a floored book acceptable? This only shows what the class have learnt and not what each child has achieved. Staff love that PSHE sessions are verbal rather than written. What balance is recommended?
I really like floor books, and if we're being completely honest, unless you do some form of assessment in any academic subject, very often what a book shows you is what a student has been taught and the notes that they've made during the lesson, unless they've done an assessment with it that's then been marked, so some questions in physics, for example, or they've written a paragraph that then somebody has dissected and marked. Your floor book is probably no different to a normal textbook, and floor books are great for use in for the younger year groups, but also in the SEN capacity. Or I know Amelia, who used to work at Sky College, uses floor books a lot with the students there in the small group work that she does there. So I think that because we don't have an outcome necessarily, and we're kind of moving into assessment a little bit here, but because we don't have an outcome necessarily with PSHE, there's not something we can measure at the end of it in the same way we can with English and maths and science, that actually some of the best lessons I've seen include really great discussion and really great conversation around a topic, and you can see the children starting to understand the different concepts and starting to recognize other people have different opinions to them and things like that. So I think discussion is a very valid outcome from a PSHE lesson.
Next question. As a school, we have a huge push on PSHE across all year groups, with each year group receiving 2.5 hours per week of PSHE lessons. However, for numerous reasons, we decided to take a no book approach, and the sessions are all discussion based. Has anyone any suggestions on how we measure record progress?
Wow, 2.5 hours. That's the dream. There's 3 of us in this office, and we've literally just all eyebrows raised and big smiles. That's brilliant. I would be really interested to understand why you've gone for a no book approach. Measure and record progress. I mean, again, we're moving into assessment a little bit here, and there will be a session on assessment in the future. And this would probably be a really good point to sort of discuss in greater detail about measuring and recording progress in terms of discussion. But I mean, you're looking at things almost, looking at what's happening with the behavior of students around school. Have you got a noticeable decrease in misogynistic language? Have you got a noticeable decrease with, people respecting not respecting people's boundaries? Maybe there's no people stealing other people's pencils or physically getting in their space and things like that. So there are other ways to look at it. I think this would be a really great discussion point for when we talk about assessment in greater detail. I would be really, really interested. I've got the chat up here. Who's this page? I would be really interested to talk to you more about why and how you've come to these decisions. If anybody else has any great suggestions on how we can measure and record progress in a verbal context, that would be great to put them in the chat. In all honesty, I don't have a good answer now, but it would be definitely something that I would love to discuss further. Anybody got any suggestions?
We have a written suggestion where is instead of assessment, I often use group work to review a topic where students write on the tables. I take photos and they glue their work into books or record the discussions on a voice recorder. Right. Yeah, and there's one here as well. Martin has suggested using forms to pre-survey and then forms to post-survey. Yeah, we were looking at introducing forms quizzes for things, either things like actually just pure knowledge. For example,
you know, what category is this drug, what would be the criminal offence with this drug, etc., etc. But equally, also you could use a forms quiz in terms of monitoring sort of case studies. What would you do in this situation, kind of thing. So I guess I was looking at it from a point of view of actually monitoring it without any other resources apart from the discussion. But definitely you can use things like forms quizzes, mind maps on a whiteboard. I've seen mind maps on a whiteboard that are then photographed and glued into books. Okay, and forms for student voice, knowledge, things like that. So yeah, I think we're moving a little bit now into assessment, and obviously this section was about timetabling. I don't know if we've got any more questions about.
We do.
Timetabling.
In Key Stage 1, is it sufficient to have PSHE as a 30-minute circle time activity? The children are not recording anything in their books at the moment.
I'm going to hand that over to Helen as a Key Stage 1 teacher to answer.
I would say, I guess I'm guessing that's just a one half an hour session per week. So if that is the case, I would probably drop into that at other times of the week to sort of build on that. So fine, if that's your one lesson, that's half an hour, it's probably not long enough. But that said, they're not going to sit still for a lot longer than that. So maybe have an additional session, perhaps a slightly shorter time, where you've kind of reflected on what you started on at that point of the week. And I always think it's great to have a good combination. So I would always say there should always be some kind of form of recording in addition to the kind of the verbal conversation. So yes, so sorry, excuse me, either some kind of floor books or some written work or some verbal conversation as well. So you've got a kind of a cross section of evidence or of what conversations you've had and whether you need to pick anything up in future or at other times of the week as well. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Like Rebecca said, quite a lot of the questions are around assessment at the moment, which we will definitely address in a different session, just potentially not this one. The only other question, which isn't quite timetabling, but I think it's an easy enough question for us to answer, is can PSHE be deep dived at Ofsted?
I think obviously I haven't experienced a deep dive in PSHE myself, but I think looking at some of the comments and messages that I've seen on other forums and Facebook pages, that yes is the answer. It can be deep dived. As to how often it is deep dived, I don't know, and I obviously don't know what the selection criteria is. In my experience of Ofsted, in terms of having that conversation, obviously supported Louisa a few weeks ago when they were Ofsteded and talked to the HMI about PSHE at the school, feedback from parents, feedback from students. So it's really valuable, I think, to make sure that you have got that evidence to hand. So you've got a parental survey, you've got a student voice, or you've got feedback from students, you've got feedback from what staff feel about the curriculum and things like that. So you make sure that you've got that you know, you don't get the call on a Sunday and you're rushing to do that on a Monday morning, for example. It should be something that you have kind of in your arsenal of information that's there, because I think that definitely helped Louisa, didn't it?
I had two comments that said that they've either had Ofsted recently or they've spoken to an Ofsted inspector in a secondary school, and they said that they don't deep dive RSE, PSHE interview subject leads.
But they do deep dive personal development, which PSHE kind of is integral to. And I think also it depends on the Ofsted inspectors as well. I feel like that it's not necessarily an Ofsted rule. I think it depends on the and Emma has just confirmed that she was deep dived in PSHE last week. So yes, it does happen. So I think it'd be you know, important to make sure that you've got the things that you need to have in place. So evidence to back up what you're doing and why you're doing it, and make sure that the member of SLT who has responsibility for PSHE is really up to date on your curriculum intent, because it'll either be you or that person in SLT who's responsible for personal development, PSHE, etc., who's having that conversation. So they need to be armed with all of the information as well.
Thank you very much. That's the questions done.
Lovely. Okay, now on to Louisa.
Hi. Oh. It's up with me, Bex. Okay. So the guidance suggests that our PSHE should be broken down so we've got clear bits and that it's not all duplicated, although obviously some of it will be covered in other areas of the curriculum. So I think it's not that it's wrong to teach it somewhere else, it's just to make sure that you're not just repeating yourself over and over. And then Ofsted said that there needs to be a stable curriculum with students getting a consistent diet of learning. So I think that's important, that it builds on what you do, what you've done previously, and that you know kind of where the students have come from and where they're going, which depends on your setting. It's very easy to do, or can be really tricky, I suppose, in secondary school with a lot of feeder primaries. That can be quite tricky to know what they've done before they come to you. Thanks. So obviously you've got a decision to make with your curriculum then, either that you're going to buy it in or prepare it yourself. And so it's not just like one answer of things that are right, and it's probably quite likely that you've got a balance of the two. We don't get paid any money for any particular curriculum. That's a thing to say there. And I'll tell you how I've done it in my school in a minute, but that's not to say it's the right way to do it. So what I've done is built my own curriculum. So if I take you through how I did that, this was quite an interesting process for me actually, because it's something that I've got over a lot of time and then tweaked it. So taking back to how I actually built this up was quite useful in my own head as well. So I think it's useful to have something to start with. So Bex, if you can kind of click through from that, would be good, thank you. Because otherwise you're really kind of inventing everything from the beginning. So for example, the PSHE Association have produced some plans, which I found quite useful to start from. And I know that Bex used those as well. And then once you've got that, if you cross-reference it yourself so that you're sure in your own mind everything's being covered. So there are quite a lot of different statutory things to look at, and also the non-statutory guidance. So once you're sure that your plan's got all of that, then your next step is probably to check what's already covered. So we talked about not having repetition. I know there's some bits that we teach in science at my school. I know our PE teacher also teaches some bits. So if you can just check to see what's already covered, and then check obviously also that the other subject teachers are quite clear on what they're doing, and that it fits in. And I think it's quite important that when it's covered in a different subject, that's actually signposted to the children, because otherwise they can be asked. So we talked about Ofsted just a minute ago, and if Ofsted are asking the children when they feel they've done PSHE, if it's covered somewhere else in the curriculum, as long as the children know that they're doing it there, that's fine. Otherwise they're quite liable to say, no, we haven't done any PSHE this week or this year or whatever, and they just need that to be really clear to them. So that's just make sure everyone else is clear on what they're doing. And then I suppose the easy bit really is just dividing all your objectives up across the year. I've put on there, just remember to allow time for lost lessons, because in my experience, and this might not be everyone else's, but I think that PSHE quite often gets taken for other things. It's quite easy to lose your PSHE time. Obviously that happens with other subjects too, if you've got Friday period 5, for example, and I don't know, the holidays fall then, but PSHE I think just seems to suffer for that. So build in some time to make sure you're not always not covering those important last bits because the time's being taken. And once you've done that, your final thing really then is just to resource everything, which I think is actually probably the fun bit. But if you're sharing that out, and again, if you're in a big setting, or if you've got a team around you, that's much easier. So if other people can do that, just make sure that everyone is clear on what the intent of what you're trying to do. I know it can be difficult, especially if you're teaching something that's maybe a little bit controversial. So you ask someone to produce some resources and it's about something, I don't know, like unsafe relationships or behaviour that they're not too comfortable like teaching, that their resources might not fit what you want to. So just make sure that they're all very clear on your intent. So we go on to the next slide. So I designed my own curriculum based on other things that are out there. So if I just quickly go through the advantages and disadvantages of doing that, the main reason I think doing that is that then you are absolutely clear on your intent. If if you designed it, you know what it's trying to achieve and you know how you're going to do that, and you can implement it in whatever way suits your setting. So you're not trying to fit things that have been produced for a 45-minute standalone lesson into a 25-minute tutor session. You can make sure it fits yours. You can be very flexible about how it fits in, and you can have the different models that Bex talked about. So you could have a mixture of things that are covered on drop-down days or things that are covered in your time. I think it's really powerful if staff can own the resources that they're using, because people then are more committed to developing them. And I think the big benefit is that it's free. So you're not having to spend probably a very limited PSHE budget on buying in a program, and then you can spend your money on other things like perhaps outside speakers or anything really, glue sticks, but things that that are available. So you're saving a lot of money doing it that way. The disadvantages of doing it yourself, the main disadvantage really is time. It does take a lot of time. It's a lot of time initially, just going through, like I say, making sure that you are hitting all the statutory things, whereas if you just buy in something, that's done for you. And if you don't have a team of people with you working through, and especially if you're doing this for a lot of people, it is a lot of work. It's a lot of time and a lot of work. So I would recommend doing it that way, but that's because that's what I chose to do. There's obviously lots of things around that. I don't know if anyone's got any questions about curriculum. I probably talked really quickly and no one had time to think of any.
We currently don't have any questions, or they start to come through. Equally, if people do have other questions that are starting to spring to mind, please also let us know. Oh, one's popped up. Are there any SEND curriculums?
No, I can't answer that question, to be quite honest. I don't know if anyone else can.
Okay, answer from the PSHE lead at this school here, who have 50% SEND students, not specific curriculums, but yes, there is a SEND framework on the PSHE Association, and I've seen lots of good individual resources. So for example, there will be individual resources provided by Mind, for example, that these are resources you would use in mainstream education, but here are some resources that you would use for somebody with special educational needs. I think I certainly haven't seen a specific set of resources purely for SEND pupils, but I think also there's a massive diversity there as well, isn't it, in terms of differentiating for all the different types of SEND need that you might need to differentiate for. Where did you source your resources? Did you create quizzes, scenarios, or did you have to go to places? I think that's a question for you, Louisa. Where did you source your resources?
Where do I source them from? Everywhere. So that's what takes a lot of time. There's obviously a lot of stuff on like the Times Ed. There are things on the PSHE Association website. I'd recommend subscribing to that for at least the first year if you're building a new curriculum. Some things I've just purely written myself from starting from the objectives and thinking about what you want it to achieve. But it is there are a lot of free resources out there. Lots of organisations and companies produce things that you can take, even if you change them quite a lot so that they fit your setting. They're quite useful to start with. It's just that, like I said, the time factor then of scouring the internet for things that are out there.
I think, and also when you take a resource that looks great on the surface, and then you look at actually what objective does that resource hit, and it's not the intended objectives that you're planning for at this point. Sometimes you can spend more time taking an existing resource and breaking it apart and using the individual bits in than it would be just to write that from scratch yourself. So I mean, Emma's put on that TES is great for resources. TES is great for resources. Again, I mean, anywhere that you get resources from, there's loads of places. Mind, Couth, Live Well, Brook Advisory, Barclays Life Skills. There's loads of places that have produced resources in line with the DfE guidance. So there are lots of places you can go to. It literally is taking the time to kind of sift through them. And whilst I'm definitely not here to advertise the PSHRE Association, they've done some of that legwork for you because they've pulled those resources into different categories. You still need to click on the link and go through and look at those resources and work out, do they meet your need? But they are split into different categories in that way. And yeah, loads of places, NHS mental health resources. Obviously we can, there are curriculums available that you can buy in. Jigsaw, Scarf, Hodder, there's lots and lots of different ones, and obviously we're not here to advertise or advocate for anyone in particular, because different people will have different experiences, and it depends on your settings. So
I have a question around Jigsaw, if anyone does have an experience of it. This person's written, we bought Jigsaw a couple of years ago. Does anyone know if it has significantly changed or needs any updating or refreshing?
Helen?
I would say, from my experience, I would say probably not significantly changed. However, I think it probably would be good if you did update your Jigsaw, because also on the website there are additional lessons that aren't necessarily included. So there are some additional things, but it's probably a wider breadth outside of Jigsaw, I would say.
Thank you. Oak National Academy is also being commented as having some good basis for lessons. I guess the last question is, any recommendations specifically for primary? So maybe Helen, you might have some good suggestions.
I've only really personally got experience of using Jigsaw. And if I'm super honest, I've kind of got sort of mixed opinions really a little bit. I'm looking at some of the advantages and disadvantages that Louise has just talked about. Yeah, I kind of sort of fall into two camps a little bit. I'm sorry, I know that's not a particularly straightforward answer. However, I don't always really feel that it kind of meets the needs of your children, and of course at the end of the day that is the the absolute key, and that's the priority, and that's what you need to do. So yeah, I'm kind of between two camps. Maybe do what we do, which is kind of mainly Jigsaw with a little bit of other things added into addition of that. But again, it depends on your context. We're a really large school in several different buildings. So for consistency, in some ways, Jigsaw really helps with that. But also you need to have a little bit of flexibility, because situations arise and you need to be able to deal with them, as and when you need to.
Thank you so much. That's the close of the questions. You're on mute, Rebecca.
Apologies. So there is a really quick feedback survey which Chloe has kindly put. I think she'll put the link in the chat. But equally, some of the questions on the feedback survey are asking you about some of the resources that we've put into the live document. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the live document, I would ask you to do that before you do the feedback survey. I think there's like 9 questions, and they're all tick box questions. We want to gather some information about who you are and where in the country, because this started off as a southwest thing, but it appears to have grown, and I think we've got people from all over the country, which is brilliant. So if you could do that feedback questionnaire, that would be excellent. The next network meeting is about how to plan and resource a lesson. So what are the non-negotiables in a lesson, whether you're primary, whether you're secondary, just looking at the generic, what does that lesson look like, and the dates to be confirmed. And that will be very much dependent on the results of the feedback survey, because we're asking about sort of logistics of when is the best time for this forum, for this meeting, and how often would you like these sessions to go ahead. There is one more thing that we looked at that isn't on this slide, and it was about the possibility of making this network a little bit more like a curriculum meeting, where and actually introducing the network element, so that actually instead of having a webinar, which we've got today, in future meetings, having the ability to pop the attendees into breakout rooms, perhaps of about 4 or 5 people, just randomly assigned, where you can talk about the particular topic and ask any questions of, 3 or 4 other colleagues who also are PSHE leads. And in that end, we're also introducing the ability for you to make contact with those, if you feel that that person that you've been speaking to would be a useful person to have their email address, then you can do that. So it'd be interesting to know your thoughts, whether you think that would be a good idea to introduce that kind of networking element in our next session. Obviously, if we're going to do that, there's a whole extra layer in terms of safeguarding and data protection and things like that, in terms of and obviously conduct and how people behave, because at the moment obviously we're talking to you now and nobody can verbally interrupt or turn their camera on. Obviously, if we do it with the ability to have a breakout room, then everybody's going to have access to, can turn their cameras on and can speak at any one point. So there would have to be a code of conduct in terms of when the presenter is presenting, that everyone's on mute and things like that. So that would be something that we would maybe look to introduce for the next session, and it would be interesting to have your feedback on that. So if you think actually that's a really good idea or that's not a good idea, could you pop that on the extra information in the feedback survey? And just last things to note, that obviously there's our Twitter handle @network PSHRE, and that the video of this session will be available on our YouTube channel within the next sort of 24-48 hours, I believe, Chloe, and that will be free to access to all, not just if you've signed up to this meeting. So if you know of people that you think that might benefit, if you could just ping them the link, that would be brilliant. Okay.
Great. We will also make sure every link is in that live document that you've got, so you don't have to search us on YouTube. You will find us. We will make sure of it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. If that's the end of questions, then that's great. Getting lots of thank yous now, so that's nice. Thank you very much, and we will stop recording.